Hey again, Facebook world. Welcome to any new likers and followers over the last couple of days. We're traveling along with a video a day for Media Theology at the moment. Love having you along. Love those of you that drop in live. And even if you can't make it live, checking out the replays. Don't be afraid to leave a comment if you've got a question, or if I hit something that resonates with you in a good way or a bad way. Jump in there and do that. Also, love it if you could tag a friend that you think would enjoy the content or get something out of the content that we've got going out across the Media Theology platform. So, as I mentioned at the end of yesterday's video, today I wanted to touch on the idea of hopelessness and Christian storytelling. Now, the reason I wanted to jump on this is a couple of days ago, I talked about some of those films like Prayer Room and Facing the Giants and things like that. Now, I haven't seen a lot of those films. I struggle with that kind of version of Christian media. That's just me. I still think there's a great purpose for that sort of content, and it should be made. It's just not the kind of content I'm into, which is fine. But look, what I wanted to do is kind of address, I think, what I find difficult with that, some of that content. So, for instance, a movie like Facing the Giants, all about a football team, college football team, and they're not going so well. The coach is not going so well, and they all of a sudden, the main characters start to increase their fervor for God, and they start praying, and they start focusing on God in their own life, and out of that, everything starts to fall into place, even to the point of, spoiler alert, but, they win the big game at the end, which, is great. It's great to have these stories of resilience, of hope, and miraculous things that do happen like that. That's a real encouragement for people as well, and we need to have those stories. But where I find sometimes we don't see enough of in Christian storytelling is around the concept of hopelessness. Now, when I say hopelessness, I don't mean an overall hopelessness, but sometimes circumstances are such that things are hopeless. Yet, I think as Christians, we're still, it's a fantastic opportunity when we're in those hopeless situations, not to see it as our Christian fervor that will bring favor from God or something like that, but that it's actually just the decision to choose to still believe, to still have faith. I'm going to get a little bit Bible-y here, as I've got in the hashtag. I just want to point out a couple of examples of this. So, one classic example is Psalm 13. Now, this is a psalm of David, and pretty much David's like, God, where are you? You're just gone. You're not here. So in terms of his situation, he's like completely hopeless. Like, if there is a God, he's gone. He's not here. Where are you? You're gone. But at the end of that psalm, it's like this decision to say, but I'm still going to praise you. I'm still, despite my circumstances, going to hold this mindset that it's not my circumstances that determine whether you're involved in this space. So that's one example. Actually, I might do a couple. We'll see how we go. And another one is the example of Abraham. And you might be familiar with this story where right at the end of Abraham's kind of journey and his story, it's the last story we have about him, God kind of tests him. You see that in the story. God's going to test him, and he says, hey, I want you to sacrifice Isaac. It's like his only son. Right? Well, it's not technically his only son, because he had another son by a slave lady, but they've been sent away. So right now there's only this one son. And the thing with this son is that if this son dies, there's no way for Abraham to be able to move forward. It's just a hopeless situation in terms of what God has promised him. And so he goes off on this journey, and as they're climbing this mountain with his son, who they reckon is probably about 13 at this time, his son's like, hey, Dad, I got it. We've got wood. We've got, some rocks to build a thing. And, it's all coming together. But we've not got anything to sacrifice here. And Abraham just kind of keeps saying, hey, God's going to provide. And really, Abraham's walking into this hopeless situation where he's going to kill his only son that's going to destroy this promise that he'll have all these descendants and all of these nations. And yet he's still speaking a word of faith that God will provide, despite the circumstances, what they might look like. That's what he's saying to Isaac. And it's really interesting when we look in the book of Hebrews later in the New Testament, and it talks about faith, and it says, it's being certain of the things that we can't see. It's despite our circumstances being certain, despite our hopelessness, still being certain to stand and say, this is how things are, this is who I am, God is here, God is real, God has saved me, those kind of things. And the really interesting is when you read through after where it talks about being sure of what you can't see, it goes through this whole list of these faithful people, and one of them is Abraham. Now, often when we have this story about Abraham, it's given as well, isn't it great that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his most precious possession, and that's what we should be like, because that's Abraham's faith. I think that misses the point a lot with the story, because central to the story is that Abraham realizes it's not just that it's his most precious possession, but it's the only thing that can keep God's promise alive. And so Abraham's faith is that God can still keep the promise somehow, magically, somehow miraculously, more though than magically, and God can keep this promise going, even if Abraham kills Isaac. And that's what you see in Hebrews. Hebrews says, Abraham reckoned that God could raise Isaac from the dead. So it's not about Abraham's faith to sacrifice his most treasured possession. It's about Abraham's faith that he believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead, even if he killed him, that God would keep his promise no matter what Abraham did. I think there's a real importance around this, is because we live in a world that is broken, and whilst we do definitely need to have amazing stories of miraculous hope, the whole thing about that makes a miracle miraculous is it doesn't happen all the time. It's not the normal. It's outside what's normal. So for every miracle we see, there's probably a whole lot of other people in that same circumstance that don't get a miraculous outcome. That just their circumstances don't change. And I think there's a great role for Christian storytelling to really work around that. Despite circumstances, we can still have hope. We can still have faith, even in the hopelessness of our world. There's so many tragic things we read about. People who give up their jobs in a westernized setting and go to be in mission work overseas in a location and end up being murdered or something like that. That's horrid. But do we look at that and say, well, we won't tell that story because it's only the hopeful stories that we want. And so I think there's a lot of space that's still open to be explored for Christian storytellers around this concept of hopelessness. We need the ones that show hope and the miraculous happening, sure, but where can we explore hopelessness and give a different version of circumstances not determining the hopelessness, despite what may be and what may seem to be hopeless. So I hope that gives you a bit of food for thought. I think we need to present a real world when we tell stories, so that we can connect with people. We've got to meet them where they are, and a lot of people live in hopeless circumstances. So chew on that. Throw your comments below. Hit me with some more questions. Hit me with some comments if you disagree, whether you agree. That's all fine. That's all good. Tomorrow, I'm going to share a little bit more on the whole idea of thinking beyond the content of a message. So I've got a great example I want to talk about. So you'll have to tune in to see what that is. And I'll be sharing about thinking beyond content when it comes to the things that we create. So have a great night. Love it if you can give this a like, a thumbs up, tag somebody, do all of the stuff that social loves you to do, and I'll see you again tomorrow. And I'm going to sign off with my traditional finish.